Okay, so we've got a packed agenda today. We want to try to keep it to an hour and a half. Even though these are important topics, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to jump right in. So we're going to try to cover home occupation, the bylaw that we went through about a year ago almost, the accessory apartment bylaw that we sort of pulled out language into a new bylaw, and then subdivision phasing as what we consider to be potential low-hanging fruit. And then Bob will help us meander through municipal use and the non-conforming bylaw that they created back for November of 22, which is now reverted back to its original. We'll get into the weeds of that in a little bit. So any comments to start off with the home occupation bylaw? I can certainly go through it in detail and sort of summarize what we did if the group wants me to do that, or if we've already read it and we're familiar with it and are okay with the language, we can expedite this process of essentially blessing it and moving it potentially forward for planning board review and possible public hearings for town meeting in the fall. Ms. Kerfoot.
Okay. Throughout, home-based is hyphenated or not hyphenated. We're going to have to make it consistent how we're going to do that. So, okay. And it's also going to then require changes under the definitions, the same kind of thing. It's on page 17 and page 52 specifically that I looked at.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. And on the, well, what's called page 1, it's under 9.5C, and it's A under number 1. Shouldn't it be down at the very last thing, section 240-9.5A and B? The B is left off. I may be wrong, but I think it should refer to B as well.
Say that one more time.
Okay.
If you would.
Okay. Under 240-9.5C1A. In acting on the special permit, next to the last line, it says with all applicable requirements of section 240-2.5, excuse me, 9.5A, and shouldn't it also be and B?
Yes, that should say B instead.
Well, or both.
Well, the way I'm reading 9.5A is just the purpose, but I mean, I guess.
But it's also got certain requirements that there won't be any outward appearance changes.
I agree with that. I think it kind of should be both, because you want it to follow the purpose and then also meet the requirements.
Right.
Okay.
There's also a correction, the third line down under criteria with the second paragraph. May be permitted provided. It's just got provide.
Okay.
I've got a note to myself and I don't know really what it means. It's at the last one under number 2, additional special permit criteria. So when I made note to myself, it's on C, and the note to self says C 9.5B and in parens 3. I don't know what it means. I'm sorry, I can't. Oh, I know, because it also says that you won't store any hazardous materials there under that particular clause. Just normal household use types of things.
Okay, so you're saying in number 2, it should say, in addition to 249.5 B3.
No, what I'm saying. No, the additional special permit criteria. We already say that there won't be any kind of hazardous waste allowed to be stored there. Do we need to say anything about under C there, the board shall make a finding that the hazardous materials storage requirements of the Water Resource Protection Overlay District have been satisfied? If they already can't use anything or store anything other than normal household use. And we don't say that of normal household use that, oh, hey, if you've got a gallon of gasoline storage, you have to follow the requirements. It's just a question for discussion. I don't know whether we should have it in or not have it in that manner.
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
On a lot of the criteria in other sections, you know, because we've been dealing with these water resource districts a lot, I think that's why they were trying to add these in there. So even though you already have a listing that you can't do the hazardous materials, it actually doesn't hurt it at all, saying that you're making a finding that it's not going to affect the Water Resource Protection District.
Bob, it doesn't hurt it. But my point was there in putting this into the discussion is by the fact that we're cutting it out and saying something of that nature, does that open it up to, oh, well, by the way, we want to store more? I don't know. That's why I brought it up. I'm okay with it being in there, but I don't want to have something put in that then opens it up to a question.
It does appear contradictory.
So you've got the same thought, Charlotte, then.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Pat.
What are these storage requirements that are based in the Water Resource Protection Overlay District?
There's a bunch of them. I mean, I won't go through them in detail, but essentially you're not allowed to store a lot of the hazardous materials as outlined in that bylaw. So there's, I guess, in summary, it basically already outlines what you can and cannot do. So I would.
Pat's point is, if you can't have any, why are you now looking at another bylaw,
Yeah.
to add another list? It doesn't make sense.
Maybe it's a belt and suspenders type of situation. So
Mm,
you've satisfied this one and you've also satisfied that one.
Why open yourself to that? Because there are many instances where we don't do both. Bob Mitchell, what do you think? Or Bob Ritchie?
Did we lose Bob?
Mm.
Bob, are you muted?
You must be.
You're muted, Bob.
Bob, you're on. Bob Mitchell,
He's not
you're
on mute though. His mute is taken off, so.
Well, it's his computer. His computer volume's turned off.
We can't hear you, Bob.
Okay, Brian, what do you think? Brian Tobin.
I think it wouldn't hurt before striking it. I think it wouldn't hurt to just double check and make sure that there isn't anything stricter that, you know, look at the definition of hazardous materials, look at what's listed under the Water Resource Protection District, and just make sure that those 100% line up so that there's not something stricter in the Water Resource Protection District. And if that's the case, then I would agree that there isn't anything, there isn't necessarily a need to be somewhat duplicative, other than to remind the board that's acting at that particular time to check that criteria.
Why
So
don't-
Brian, was there anything in there, very rarely do you see these where they're asking you to specifically make a finding in the decision. This is specifically asking for a finding, which usually makes me think it has something to do with the actual permit. And that's the only reason I'd be a little nervous striking it, because you just don't see that very often. That, usually you say what the board has to consider, but you never see the board must make a finding in the decision.
Sure, so
So
I
that was
would,
my worry.
I would defer, I believe Bob and Bob were initial drafters, so I would defer to their thought process there, but I would state one legal principle that when, in the special permit granting process, specifically when a special permit granting authority is granting a special permit, they do need to make a finding of all criteria that are listed in the bylaw. And that's set by case law that's interpreting 48 section 9, MGL 48 section 9.
So maybe what we should do, and by we, I mean staff, we can take a closer look at what Brian has just suggested, the whole idea of, that overlap, and bring that back to the group for our next meeting, provided that you're comfortable with that approach. Unless there's some other comments that, you want us to look into, but that way, perhaps at the next meeting, we could say, okay, based on what planning has discovered, it's good to have both of these things in here, or the reverse, and we can make a decision at that time. I'm just not able to do that right now.
Well, what Brian just said, and Brian, this is the first time I've met you. It's nice to meet you. From what Brian just said, this being a special permit, wouldn't there have to be a finding met by the board that
Hi,
all
Bob.
of these parts are met?
It is, but what happens a lot when the board is doing their findings and conditions, and they have to be done at the public meeting, we normally don't get a specific criteria that says, make sure this is in here. If you miss it at your meeting and don't put the finding in, you can't reopen to go back. So that's why I said it's unusual to see in, when I was on the board, it was unusual to see in these bylaws that very specifically listed, you kind of like, don't forget this finding must be in there. Because whenever we did come across that in advance of the meeting, I'd write it in that that's a must that we have to have. But again, if we don't do it at the public meeting, we miss that. There isn't going back. That's why I think it might be in there to remind you that this is one specific thing that has to be in there for a finding so that it doesn't get missed.
Okay, another way of perhaps handling it, that it's not opening it up, you could say that the board shall make a finding that although no hazardous materials in excess of that normally allowed in a residential or whatever, however the language is, are allowed, the hazardous material storage requirements will be, have been satisfied. So that we reiterate that there are none above what can be allowed for a normal household.
Could we go along with Jed's suggestion? Because if it's duplicative, I'd rather get rid of it. If it's not and we need it, then rewording it doesn't change that.
No, that makes sense to let him do the research that he needs to
Mhm.
find out the information.
Mr. Mitchell.
Under the philosophy of not having sections that might confuse people or might seem in conflict, I agree with, if it's really not needed, don't have that second section. And just leave it as no hazardous materials allowed, period. Given, but leave that to the judgment after Jed goes through, or the staff goes through the water resources to see if there is any reason to keep it, but if there isn't, junk it.
Okay. Other than that, since I picked things out like this, I have no problems with the way this is done.
But good of you to point out the fact that we do need to make adjustments to the definition. So perhaps starting at the beginning, or probably I should have, the purpose of today's meeting is to essentially try and decide on articles, or I should say amendments, that we want to bring to fall town meeting. And so that's why we have such a heavy agenda, because there's potential to bring forward not only the home occupation, the accessory, and the subdivision potentially, but also to potentially consider these municipal and non-conforming items that we have on our agenda. Part of additional items that we would bring to fall town meeting would be the revisions, some of the revisions that we have already for the definitions, as well as addressing some of the AG's comments that they had on our approval. So all that to say is it could be a very busy fall town meeting, and this group has already decided that we want to try to ease into it. So with that sort of, I guess, introduction, approximately 20 minutes into the meeting.
Ed, could I add to your introduction to the list? The issue that's come up, and maybe more pressing if we get more people taking us up on Mr. Cod, is parking. And I'm wondering if we could add, looking at the parking requirements for Mr. Cod projects for the multifamily district that we just created. We're already bumping into it now with the workforce housing proposed on Main Street, and it will come up again. It'd be better to get it straightened out.
Yeah, unfortunately, because parking is likely going to be such a large topic, unless the group disagrees, we've sort of pushed it off a little bit, not far, but just a little bit, not to fall town meeting, but perhaps to a future town meeting after that, so that we can take a comprehensive look at parking rather than, chipping away at it. Although we are struggling with it currently.
I guess my preference would be chipping. Pat, how do you feel?
I think it's going to be a more contentious subject, and so I think we're going to be left hanging out there for a little bit on it, and having to make a site by site until we can actually get to the parking bylaw. I don't like it, Charlotte,
No, I know.
but when I consider everything else that's in front of us, like right now, this home-based, I think, is ready to go once Jed and
Right.
who's going to be looking at it? But whoever on staff is going to be looking at this, I think it's ready to go.
I love your enthusiasm, Charlotte. I really do, because I think parking is one of those things that we've got to tackle. But I'm losing hair really, really quickly. So I want to try to keep what's there. Please. Any other comments on home occupation? Okay. So we'll do some research. We'll come back at the next meeting, but this is a contender perhaps for fall town meeting. Next item is the accessory apartment. So what we did here is we basically took the exact language that's found in the use tables in both the agricultural and the residential use table, and basically gave it its own bylaw or its own section. And we threw it into Article 9, which is, I believe, special use regulations. And obviously, because of its alphabetized situation, it's 9.1. We made some very minor tweaks to really, it's just the way the sentences sort of come together, and added some minor stuff, as you can see. The one item that I think we should probably consider doing here is similar to what we did with the Mr. Cod bylaw, is instead of having the definition listed in the actual bylaw, the accessory apartment, you'd pull that definition out and you'd put it into Article 3, where all the definitions exist. So that might be something that we want to talk in more detail about. But in my opinion, the rest of the, the edits or the tweaks were minor in nature, basically just trying to clean up sentences to make them sort of make a little bit more sense. But do we have any comments on those?
Yep. Sorry,
Fire
but
away.
okay. First paragraph under purposes. When you go down next to the last sentence, town's housing supply, and I can't tell what's going on there. It should be a comma, but then the all becomes a lowercase.
Okay, so you want to go back to the way it was originally written? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, unless it's going to be two sentences.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you've got a semicolon in there, but in any case, however you do it, the word all should not be capitalized.
It's a period. So it's striking out the comma that was there, and now it's a period, making the all a separate sentence. So that's why the
Okay,
A is
Then
capitalized.
that becomes a fragment sentence.
Okay.
And I don't think Bob Mitchell likes fragment sentences, and I know I don't.
I'm more tolerant of them myself.
Okay.
Yeah, capitalized all is that is not a sentence.
So we'll throw in some grammar that helps it become a sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I just had a question under, what do you mean by definitions? So yeah, I think that should be thrown into definitions, because right now accessory, there's nothing really good in there as far as accessory apartment. Now, I'm wondering, do we really want to get rid of all site plan review? Could it be made administrative if we keep it in there? Because we have certain things coming in front of us, and it's a good thing we had site plan review, because we catch a few things that wouldn't look good in the neighborhood. So that's a question I have that we can discuss, I think. Under 290-9.1D, 1B, it should be residence. The very last word, instead of resident, it should be residence. You got that?
Got it.
Okay. And under C, I'm wondering, because this has caused problems in neighborhoods, if it should read, parking for the accessory apartment shall be provided on site in a manner compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. In other words, if all the cars are parked back on the lot, you shouldn't have them parked right up into the street, not on the street, but right up against the street. That's one of the things that we look at in our site plan review, is how are they going to provide parking? So that it's not sticking out like a sore thumb. It looks, the visual appearance is as if it's not a sore thumb sticking out. It's part of the house, the neighborhood.
Couldn't you address that just by the natural operation of site plan review rather than amplifying subsection C?
We could, but right now there's no site plan review in this bylaw, unless
Okay.
I misread it.
There
It's
must
been
be
dropped
site
out.
plan review.
No, ma'am. Unless it's been dropped out. I didn't see it.
No, I'm saying there should be in the final product, there should be site. plan
Oh,
review.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm bringing that up.
Right.
So
That would avoid having to put countless details into the body of this bylaw.
Right.
So-
I'm a little confused. 249.1E, prior to the issuance of a building permit, site plan review shall be conducted by the planning board. What am I missing? That,
Oops.
that's.
I said, unless I missed it. Sorry.
yeah, I was just going to say that. So it's still there. So number one is the site plan, and number two is if a detached structure, you'll have two medical appointment.
I'm sorry I missed that. My bad.
No problem. Any thoughts on Pat's addition to 249.1D, number 1, the parking on site, and then Pat, if I'm going to just reiterate what you said, in a manner consistent with the neighborhood. Is that what you said?
Yes, because we have places where we can have on a smaller lot, an accessory apartment, and they're all parked right up against the street. So what difference is it going to make? When we normally, our normal thought in doing this is that we wanted the accessory apartment parking to be hidden somehow, or to be looked at as if it were the same as the house.
Can you legally start telling people where they're allowed to park on their own property?
You actually have to, because if they park near a septic system or too close to a building or gas service. So when they, when site plan review is done by the planning board, you have to show, is it a driveway? Is it a parking space? What the substrate is.
Right.
I think that was in there from before, Pat, because you're right, because the biggest issue was that when people were looking at these, they were having issues where they were parking on the roads.
Right.
Directly out front. And I think that's why they wanted to have something in there that said specifically it would be on the site itself. So they knew in advance.
Right. And so this does say it shall be provided on site, but I'm also thinking that in a manner compatible with what they're doing in the rest of the neighborhood. If it's on their lot, but they're parked up,
Yeah, I guess that was my question. I understand having to show a parking or a driveway, but if I want to park my car at the end of my driveway just because I like to park it at the end of the driveway, what do you say?
this was more for discussion because I know what the thought was when we were first putting this bylaw together.
Mr. Mitchell.
A couple of comments. So Michaela, back to your question, you certainly can tell people where they can and can't park on their own property. That's not uncommon. There's lots of communities that ban parking in the front yard, except on the driveway. Any place, there's communities that ban parking where the vehicle sticks out over the property line or sticks out over the sidewalk or sticks, out. And, so there are various criteria that communities use to determine parking on the site.
Right, but they do need to show adequate parking on site for the planning board for site plan in a driveway or a parking area.
Okay. But this is kind of a general comment with in a manner compatible or consistent with the neighborhood. Suppose in the neighborhood doesn't have any consistent parking standards. You have different houses built at different times, short driveways, long driveways, no driveways, garages. It's kind of, I understand where you're trying to get at that, but it's kind of a nebulous statement.
Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right?
Ed,
I just put that in as a suggestion because that was when I screwed up and didn't see the site plan review. So that can very readily be taken out. Just scratch that comment.
Okay. Any
Right.
other? Oh,
I
You have
think this
anything
is ready to, my opinion is this is ready to go.
great. Now, I just want to remind everyone that, we had talked a little bit about the possibility, much like what we're going to be talking about with the following items later in the agenda, of making more changes to the accessory apartment bylaw for fall town meeting. And that is to say, we as staff, we've heard from some of the applicants that the square footage may be too small. some people would like to see, accessory apartments even up to 1,000 square feet. And there's also been comments about the 40% rule and confusion about how to add all that up. And so those had been 2 items that, we wanted to throw around with the work group. Understanding that if we were to take those things on, it would likely delay this, I think, past fall town meeting. So really, it's just a fork in the road, if you will, at this point. Do we want to try to take on those conversations, or are we just comfortable with the way it looks now and just pulling it out to its own section in Article 9?
I agree that it's a much longer conversation. Increasing the square footage or the percentages, you're really now talking about a 2-family arrangement on a single lot. And the idea of the accessory apartment was that that would not happen, that it would be considerably smaller. It would not be a 2-family arrangement. As soon as you make enough room for 3 people, they're going to be there. So I think for this next for the fall town meeting, we're better off just cleaning it up slightly and moving it.
And I agree with you, Charlotte, because our original home before we put the addition on was about 1,100 square feet. You don't need to give somebody up almost to another home size. That's not the whole purpose of this. It was for a young couple, a young person, or a retired couple who wanted to downsize and rent their other part.
I think it was sort of multi-purpose, but really tiny.
Yeah.
Keep it quite limited. If we go ahead and over the next months and take on short-term rentals, these two would be very connected. And making it larger I just don't think it's a good idea without giving it a lot more thought than we're going to give it now.
And one more item I had forgotten was this currently, as we just described, if you're doing a detached structure or a detached accessory apartment, you have to go see 2 boards. There has been some discussion of, let's try to make it easier for an applicant. And do we really need to have 2 reviews for a detached? Again, that's another item. Do we want to throw that in the air and consider it for this fall town meeting, or should we stay the course and have that conversation down the road?
Could we ask Rob to comment on how often the second hearing has made any difference?
I mean, on most of the ones that we've seen, we've always approved them. I'd have to review back to see if we made any additional changes to anything specific in the application or not, but I mean, they've always been approved. I haven't seen, I wasn't on one specifically that was problematic. I think it was more of an issue with it might have been an issue when it was first switched over, before we had the bylaw in, the zoning board did all of them. We decided, you decided that you wanted to switch them out. So there was a slow changeover. So I don't know how much an effect it would be regarding the public. Sometimes on, a town meeting and a public thing, when suddenly you're taking a procedure in taking a department out, sometimes you get more discussion of, is that problematic for the public? If it went through a double check process, is that really a problem in general? I don't think it really added much time to the applications that much when we had the detached structures. It all depends too if there was ever a special permits on those other structures.
Well, we had one instance where an applicant simply added a roof between the 2 structures to turn it into sort of like a breezeway to avoid that. And I think it might be avoiding the professional help bills that come with the 2 hearings.
Well, that's actually an old fix. I don't know if Gary remembers, but that's what they used to just do in general way back when, to kind of finish off these spaces. They would just take a roof line and attach them and say, now it's one building.
Yeah.
But if you're, I don't know if they're doing that just to get through the process. It's different if they're doing it. I think that they're doing it as a bypass of the two board process. I think they're doing it for other reasons if they do something like that. So not really, it doesn't lengthen their process that much. Adding a roof line between the two probably wouldn't have changed it that much. So I think it was probably a different situation that they were getting into. But when you're dealing with multiple structures on properties, neighborhoods tend to get nervous. Just for the fact that there are multiple buildings already and what were the changes. I mean, I know in the Heights in general, there's been a lot of them over the last couple of years that they've actually done the detached buildings have been added on with, let's say, a family room with a bath and some sort of a looking kitchenette. That can go through the building department differently, but you know, people in those areas all know they're being used as an actual apartment.
Mr. Duffy.
That I have only been on the Board of Appeals for 6 months now, but we've had a number of these accessory apartments, and I personally have felt very comfortable having having the planning board look at them from their point of view. Maybe down the road it might be appropriate to change it, but personally I feel comfortable having it the same way.
I mean, Frank, having it be only the one board rather than the two.
No, having two.
Keep the two.
Keep the two. At some point, you know, it might be appropriate to do it, but I'm just talking personally from my own experience that I think having the planning board take a look at these things right now is beneficial.
Anybody else?
I have to excuse myself. I have somebody knocking at my door.
Well, I think obviously there's three topics, right? So we've got that 40%, we've got the square footage, even though, you know, some members feel that it shouldn't go up, and this potential conversation about streamlining the process potentially. So maybe for the good of the group, we can just say those will be more of a long-term conversation, and we just move the bylaw forward as it's shown here to pull it out of the use table and clean it up a little bit. And if we decide in the future that we want to revisit it, we can. That seem appropriate?
Yes.
Great.
Before we leave it, I'd like to just let you know, I've heard from a fellow whose business it is renting short-term rentals, and he read ADU as being additional housing units. And he's really not wrong about that. Right, so it's really in thinking about, we're going to keep now the two reviews when they're not connected, which that's fine, but it puts the brakes on the additional housing unit idea.
You know, the other thing that staff can do is we can confer with Noreen over and just figure out, okay, so we've had all of these detached applications come through. Planning has taken a first stab at them. Were any revisions made at the ZBA level? If not, we can bring that data back to the group and we can say, well, you know, based on past history, you know, nothing's really changed, or, you know, ZBA has noticed some things. And so maybe that extra review is helpful. So we can just bring that information back and we can sort of pin that conversation for a future date. But move this bylaw forward as some easy stuff for town meeting for fall.
Right.
Mr. Mitchell.
Just a quick sidebar from my planning world. All this conversation you're having about accessory dwelling units, and you've had previously, and you're talking about having more in the future. It's interesting to me and to a whole lot of other people that all three of the northern New England states, Vermont, New Hampshire, and New England, have passed state legislation that mandates every single city and town in those states allow accessory dwelling units. And in Vermont and in Maine, it's mandatory by right. And in New Hampshire, some of them, depending on circumstances, is by right, and some of them is what they go through a conditional use permit. Vermont's had the legislation for many years. New Hampshire's had the legislation for a number of years. Maine just passed it last year. And I haven't heard of civilization collapsing in any city or town in one of those states because somebody built an ADU in their yard by right. It's astounding to me in Massachusetts how endless the discussion is and the horror stories are and the protests are about ADU when our three northern neighbors just said, just build ADUs in your yard, you know, with certain requirements and criteria, and everything's been fine. Just the comparison.
I think that's interesting that New Hampshire, the live free or die state, said you must, or you shall. Anyway, okay, so it sounds like we're in agreement that we make some minor tweaks and we pull this bylaw out just the way it is.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, next item, subdivision phasing. I don't know much about this bylaw, where it originated from. I'm assuming it's because there was a lot of subdivisions that were coming through the town at some point. But in just reading this, you know, just reading this as an outsider, wrong word, but just reading this just off the cuff, I don't see the value in keeping it anymore. The planning board gets maybe a subdivision or two a year. They're generally very small. They don't ever exceed 20 lots. But I have certainly not been here for a long time. So I would, you know, sort of open this up for, does anyone have any knowledge of this bylaw and it coming in handy in the past, and for reasons why we would consider, I guess, keeping it in the zoning bylaw? Mr. Duffy.
I think the genesis of this was probably when we were entering into subdivisions at a rapid pace, and we have some fairly significant subdivisions that are very large. I agree with you. I don't think there's much land left for us to accommodate any of these major subdivisions anymore. And also, I think most of the big development we're going to see is probably going to be done under 40B. And there may be some phasing under 40B, but it will probably be by agreement between the developer and the board rather than by bylaw. Yeah, I don't see much use for it anymore, personally.
I went back, dug through my Falmouth files and went back to when Bob and I were doing interviews with, you know, people in town hall and people outside town hall, and when we were reviewing the bylaw to see what my notes were on this. And the notes, so there were a couple of items that kept coming up, but one, this is obviously an old bylaw. I mean, it refers to, you know, lots from 1984. I don't know when this was adopted, but there have been court cases since this was adopted, and one case in particular. So one of the issues was this really needed a legal review as to whether it's even legal based on subsequent court cases. Another comment that came up in a number of our interviews were, it's confusing, it's vague. If it's going to stay, it needs to be rewritten. And so the comment in our matrix, you remember our matrix of all the things on the to-do list, was that this needed a thorough review to decide A, keep it or not, B, if you're keeping it, make it legal and make it readable and make it understandable. So that's just an FYI for everybody.
Ms. Kerfoot.
My comment is, if you read the purpose, it's gone. To encourage a constant pace of residential development. Provide long-term support to the local building industry. I don't think so. Stabilize property values. The horse has left the barn on that one. Facilitate adequate provision of public services to the individual developments in the town in general. We're constrained by the laws already as to what we can do for adequate sewage treatment collection. So I think just if you look at the purpose, it's gone.
I think the court cases that Bob mentioned remind us that the legality of the bylaw is time dependent. It may have been lawful in 1984 under the circumstances that prevailed then, but the courts will look at the configuration of the town as it is today, and taking what Frank says to be the case, it's a different situation. And the elevated justifications that are needed to crimp the power of landowners to subdivide is constantly under increasing scrutiny. I would be seriously concerned about this under a series of cases. But it does require a thorough legal review. I have not done that.
I guess the question becomes, do we need a thorough legal review if, when we're reading the applicability and we're talking about 20 lots in a 12-month period, and if we can demonstrate over the course of, say, the last 5 to 8 years, we haven't had any subdivisions, and we can also demonstrate that the likelihood of having any future ones, does it really require a thorough legal review? Because we just don't have the land, as Frank said, we don't really have the land that anyone could do that with in a subdivision approach versus a 40B.
I see
That's the
another,
Achilles heel. That's the Achilles heel in this.
I see another issue that may be concerning, and that is in 240-14.6, the exceptions down at the bottom, that the planning board can issue a special permit when it determines that the benefits to the town outweigh the adverse effects. Now, I know the next paragraph has some impacts, but that's really kind of wishy-washy and very, very subjective. And probably subject to challenge just about any time it's exercised. So just my comments.
So it looks like we're all headed to, let's dump it.
I like that idea.
And absolutely, we. Sorry.
Okay, okay, so we dump it. And somewhere down the line, the vote, because I'm sure it will come back to vote statewide again to get rid of 40B or something like it, then what?
And create a new bylaw.
Yeah.
In a hurry?
Well, we've got this one we can quasi pattern it after, but what both the Bobs have said is it's probably not even legal now the way it is.
Right, well, it seems we're either gonna dump it or we're gonna pay for legal review, or, well, that we don't have to do that. We have town attorneys.
Yes.
It certainly wouldn't hurt to have that legal review done just as in preparation for the possible need to rehabilitate it.
Because if you fly over the town, I know you can't see through the trees in the summer, but it appears to be land there. And there's quite a bit of land between 28A and 28 that's being developed pretty rapidly. I mean, it just, I agree that we don't have the amount of land we had in 1984, but we've still got some. Golf courses are being converted. Farms are still there. There's land.
Good. So if you go to town meeting to take this out, and there's multiple reasons to take it out, but to me, the most inarguable reason to take it out is that it's illegal. So I think having a legal review that comes to that conclusion is a solid basis to go to town meeting, and then you can add in these other issues you've been talking about. And then Charlotte, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your comment about if you take this out, something else happens.
Well, 40B may not be forever. Efforts are made periodically by the people who don't like it to get rid of it. Sometime it could succeed. Where would that leave us? But I'm not arguing against the legal review. I guess I'm arguing against just plain dropping it without doing that.
Charlotte, I think I concur with you, considering that if we bring it to town meeting, they're going to want some reasoning behind our saying, let's just dump it.
Right.
And if under legal review from town council, that is found to be completely illegal the way it is now.
Not completely, just, in some portion or whatever.
Yeah,
turns out
whatever.
The answer.
But then we'd have to rewrite the whole thing. So either if we decide we want to get rid of it and town meeting says no, okay, fine, then it's still there, but then we have to redo the whole thing because it's not legal the way it's written, if that's what the legal review says.
We'll just take it one step at a time. We
Yeah.
do the review and find out where we are. Brian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that could be an appropriate approach. I guess I would also just add that, there's something being illegal in the general sense of what that means, and then there's something being enforceable. And I'm assuming when Bob are referencing the legality in the developing case law, what they're talking about is that if the town were to enforce this bylaw, there's a good chance that it might be found unenforceable based on recent, the more recent developments in case law. If that's the case, I also think one perspective that this committee may consider is that all the reasons to take it off are just as many reasons to leave it on, and that you can always just tweak it later as opposed to getting an entirely new bylaw passed later in the event Charlotte's comments do come true. Golf courses closed down and larger developments do come in place, and potentially the case law likewise evolves. So just a thought.
Thank you. So therefore, we're sending it off for legal review.
That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Great. So that leads us into municipal uses, which I will pass over to Bob Mitchell and Bob Ritchie. And don't forget, we still have non-conforming. So we're just about at the noontime hour.
Okay, well, this is another one of these topics that you've seen before. I wrote a discussion paper almost a year ago with the various issues. I mean, fundamentally, I'm sure recall that your bylaw treats municipal uses differently and inconsistently from zoning district to zoning district to zoning district to zoning district. Some things are allowed in one, some things aren't allowed in another district. The wording is inconsistent. Some places municipal uses are allowed by right everywhere. Some places, it's a mix of things. So that's the fundamental issue. And it raises the policy question of how do you want to treat municipal uses? And so the second document you got from Jed is I went back just a month or so ago. I didn't go back. A month ago, I just went through a few other Cape towns and looked through their bylaws as to how they treat municipal uses. And as you can see, most of them are pretty consistent that they just allow municipal uses as a yes by right, period. Now, there's some quirks about that from each town, Sandwich, Dennis, Barnstable, Mashpee, but I just wanted to give you an example of how other towns around you treat municipal uses. So, you know, this, well, it's up to the work group as to if you want to put this on the next agenda to have a more in-depth discussion, or you have ideas now or thoughts or questions now.
My thought, I went back and found the chart you created for us in Excel to show what had been allowed in the different ones. And you look at them and you think, well, gee, where it differs, it's really because of the character of those places.
Mhm.
The likelihood of an armory appearing somewhere near in an agricultural area or a marine district is relatively low. I guess I'm more in favor of municipal uses being just a yes, rather than detailed.
When I reviewed what was here, it seemed to me that the things that were not in the individual zoning areas had to do with the potential for disturbance of whatever was there, a noxious sort of use to what was there, and how we separate that. If in fact we say yes to everything, I don't have any idea how to do that.
Well, the other thing about municipal uses is the process the town has to go through in order to get the money to do anything like this. So they're going to be very thoroughly reviewed by the finance people, by the select board, by town meeting, before they get to do anything. The question I would have on municipal uses is once they do it, I'm thinking now of the fire station project on Sandwich Road. They clear cut that lot. Well, we don't allow clear cutting. So what's with that?
Well, Charlotte, don't forget, they had to clear cut the lot because that's where all of the structure and stormwater features and all of the things that are required. So that was through the site plan review process where we saw where they were going to be clear cutting, and they limited that by the size of the lot. So there was not much they could do there. And they did preserve some of the area which they had indicated on the site plan. So I mean, I think obviously that's a separate topic for another discussion, but I think the purpose of this idea or this conversation is to say, are we just lumping them into one category? And I think we had started down that road roughly a year ago, and we had got bogged down pretty hard in, you know, is a beach a use, right? Or is a water tower, you know, something that we want to highlight versus just doing, and I think Frank, maybe you were the one who had suggested this whole idea of essential municipal uses, and I think it was discretionary, if I'm remembered correctly.
Yeah, what the biggest concern we had, or controversy with municipal uses, was probably the wind turbine case. But we also, from my experience, we had municipal uses with radio towers. That was just not so much now an issue, but it was an issue years ago in the height of them. Another issue that has come up that I think has been highlighted in this material that you sent us is that there are a lot of municipal purposes that are really the same as some private uses. For example, what is the difference between Falmouth High School and Falmouth Academy from a zoning point of view? I don't really know that there is. And then are we really talking about municipal uses or public uses? I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Another controversial municipal use was the wastewater treatment plant. Because if you might remember years ago, when it was built, it smelled for quite a while, and there was a lot of controversy about that. So just to allow everything by right may not be the answer, but I don't know that we really have to jump through all of the hoops for municipal purposes where they are necessary.
I'm getting the sense, because this is somewhat of a dense topic, that we may want to dedicate, like we did previously, dedicate a meeting to just this topic,
I think so.
because it's going to take a while to get through it.
Do you ever have a municipal use as a yes with site plan review? Is that a
fire-
possibility?
Yes.
So that they're all yeses, but with site plan review?
Yes,
Yeah, the fire
Okay.
station.
that's actually how a lot of communities treat municipal uses. They go through a site plan review process.
Because I just don't see giving carte blanche, because there are certain things that could be noxious in a neighborhood. Well, it's a municipal use. We can put it here if we want to.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, the purpose of throwing it onto this agenda was to get a sense from the group if we want to buckle down and try to take this on for fall town meeting. At least that was my understanding. What I'm hearing is that it's a longer conversation and we should not buckle in.
Right.
If we do it just as site plan review, because site plan review is pretty much a by right for by right uses, and understandably, that's what a municipal use would be under. However, like Frank said earlier, the wind turbines were a huge problem back, 10 so years ago. So if it's a by right use or if it's allowed by site plan review, you're still going to have a lot of unhappy people who are still going to take action of some sort or try to. So that's the only issue I would see with every single one being allowed. However, I don't know how else to approach that.
So considering the fact that it's going to be a longer conversation, the group okay with bringing it back to the next meeting? So that would be in April
Yes.
to have a more thorough conversation.
Would it be worthwhile to have a conversation with town administration or DPW to look at potential municipal interests that they may have, like a lift station or something like that, to see if there's some way to accommodate everybody's needs?
Might also want to see what they have in their long-term plan. So we might have to deal with some specific problem we're not thinking of.
Right.
That's a good point.
How would something like the wind and coming ashore, where they want to come ashore with the cable, where would that fall in here? It's
Not a land
private.
use.
Pardon? Well, it's private like a lot of these other things, but if the town wanted to do something like that, it would be municipal. So how would something like that, it could be argued, the good of the whole community? I'm not arguing it, mind you. I'm just saying, for the good of the whole community, this must be allowed. Because it's similar to kind of a municipal use of provision of electricity.
It's underground a use.
I don't know, Frank.
I know they're like the transformer stations and the substations are, but conduits under the street, I don't know that we can regulate them by zoning.
well, also electrical facilities, whatever they are regulated by the Department of Public Utilities at the state level.
But I can see where we might be getting into certain things like this as time goes on. So I think Noreen's suggestion of talking with other entities for their long-term thoughts would be very beneficial.
Yeah, we can do that for the next meeting. We just speak to DPW and et cetera, just to get a handle on what we might be anticipating in the next 5-10 years. So moving the ball down the field, last item on the agenda is non-conforming, unless there was anything else on municipal uses.
No.
Nope.
Okay. So as you all remember, and this is from somewhat of a complicated article, part of the, and Bob, I'm going to obviously hand the ball off to you, but the part of the contract with Bob and Bob was to draft a new non-conforming article. That was done. It was incorporated in the recodification attempt number 1 at November of 2022. We ultimately reverted back to the old language, which was found in the original bylaw, and that was passed in this past November's town meeting. So what was provided to you or to the group was a redlined version of the old language revised to the November 22 language, and then also the current language that we have in our bylaw. So with that very confusing introduction, I will pass the ball over to Bob Mitchell, and I'm going to go take a nap, I think.
Well, unfortunately, Bob Ritchie had to leave, and he is Mr. Non-conforming, and he wrote all of this. So we can end the meeting early. No, a couple of things. So, right, Jed's correct, in the 2021, November 2021 version of the bylaw that went to town meeting, all of the new language that included some of the old language, the expanded Article 10 was part of that. And then for all the reasons you all know, you decided to pull that off of the version that went to November 2022. The version that went to November 2022 was, I took your existing non-conforming language, which, like so much other language, is spread all over the place, and reorganized it into what went to November 2022, and that got adopted. So that the current bylaw has the old language reorganized into a better, format and in sequence. And so that still leaves the larger non-conforming section. And one of the other documents you were provided for this meeting was, I went back and pulled out the crosswalk from November 2021 that shows the crosswalk for the larger non-conforming section, Article 10, that shows you how much is new and where the old language came from. And you can see it's a real mix of old language and new language. And the version of the actual document itself, I did new language in red line, so you could see it word for word, what was new and what was old. So a couple of questions and a couple of thoughts. The question, of course, is the fundamental question, which is the question of the day for this meeting. Is this something you want to take back to fall town meeting? Or do you want to spend more time going back and reviewing the proposed new section 10? And related to that, I think that it would be helpful if the people that dealing with nonconformities, like your building commissioner and Noreen and zoning board members, actually kind of went back and went through this proposed language again to see what their reaction is, and is this does this need more tweaks, or do they have questions or whatnot? So that would be one step I think would be helpful. And in the planning board, and the work group itself, going back and reviewing this and seeing Because it's much, obviously it's much more extensive than the existing language. Bob felt that really there was a lot of things missing in the town's bylaw in the old language. And things that didn't seem to be covered. So he was trying to cover all the bases, I guess. And so that's where we are today.
Well, I've got one question only, Bob, because it boggled my mind reading it. On what's labeled page 103, under 2, down towards the bottom of the page. A non-conforming use of a LPLL structure. I do not know what that LPLL is. It's like a typo, but I don't know how to translate it to something meaningful.
On 103.
It's, well, it's on the copy we were given, the red line one. And on at the bottom of the page, it's 103. It's under 240-10.3A2, and it's the second line on A2.
It looks like a.
That's
What is it?
LPLL has no meaning whatsoever.
I know, should it just be
It's a
crossed
typo.
out?
That's weird.
Okay, so a non-conforming use of a structure may be changed.
Yes, yeah.
So that just comes out. Thank you.
Ah,
I thought, oh dear, whose fingers did what there?
So I think perhaps to just get right to the point, I think let's say this. How many of us feel comfortable with proceeding to fall town meeting with modifications to this bylaw or to this article?
Or Article 10?
Correct.
And when do you have to have finalized language by?
September, I think.
Because I would think that's eminently doable. Frank, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think we got enough time to do something.
Yeah. I apologize. I didn't spend a lot of time on that particular one, and I also apologize for being late. I got an interesting phone call. But anyway, I did have some comments on the home-based business section. So should I just scan that in and send that along?
Well, why don't we do this? I guess we could probably take it up now, but it sounds like if the group is in agreement, we buckle down and we try to tackle Article 10 for fall town meeting.
Yes.
That would be
Okay.
great.
Yeah, that comes up all the time. It's just every zoning board meetings, there's at least one or two of those. So
Yeah.
the sooner we can address it, the better.
All right, so I propose, based on its necessity, that we flip its order with municipal uses. So instead of talking about municipal uses at the next meeting, we devote our time to nonconformity.
Okay.
And then once we get through that, go back to municipal.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other comments on non-conforming? Because it sounds like we would be talking about it at the next meeting. If not, then we'll just, Noreen, you can hit us with your comments on home-based business.
Yeah.
All right, looks like no other comments. What do you got, Noreen?
All right, I'll give you the quick shopping list. The first note I had was, did you want to reference childcare? Because I think that's a very popular home-based business. And I know that it has special state exemptions, but I just wondered if it should be referenced.
Okay.
The other thought that I had was for your title section where you have home-based business. I was wondering if you should reference the fact that this is essentially a combination of the former service and occupations, so that somebody who has followed along could understand tracking wise.
Yeah, I think that's useful.
Let's see.
Where, more, Noreen,
Yep.
may I interrupt you?
Sure.
Because when you say reference it, should it be done as a footnote?
Yeah.
Well,
something
I
like
was thinking about potentially putting it in parens or under the title where you have home-based business, that in parens underneath you could write, incorporates the former home-based service business and occupations.
Because I don't see it that way in a bylaw. I see it more as a footnote,
Okay,
but I could be wrong.
Yeah, footnote's fine.
Yep.
But it should be there. Something should be there.
and then when going to the 240-9.5, you've got it listed as B. I would recommend before the word requirements, adding as of right, because that next section, you're telling people what they can do as of right.
I hear that.
Let's see what else. There were a couple of notes that I had about sentences that sort of got split, but I would assume that you'll just make those alignments corrected, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Under number 4, which is listed as merchandise, I think what I'm understanding there is that, I don't know, we'll pick jewelry making, right? So if you make jewelry in your house, you can sell it. But I think the part about other parts or items customarily maintained in connection with and incidental to, I didn't exactly understand what that would entail. I was trying to surmise what you would make on the premises. I don't know if you make dog houses, do you also sell dogs on the side because they're incidental to the dog house? I don't know. I wasn't sure what the purpose was. I would almost leave it as saying that you're only selling what you're making on the property, but
Well, I just went to, this is kind of a weird story, but we just went to a maple syrup place where, they did maple syrup and they had maple syrup soaps, but they didn't make the soap on site, but they gave them the maple syrup and then the soap maker let them sell soap from their barn with the maple syrup. Like, is that an example of incidental?
I just wonder, I don't know how specific you want to get. So if I make, I don't know, like if I make Roombas, do I also now separately sell the battery pack that goes in there? It just sounds like we're getting like big time into weeds. And who exactly is going to review or enforce that? I guess to me, it just seems most simple to say that you could sell what you make, because you're not expecting primarily for these home-based businesses to be what, an architect, an accountant, an attorney. Sorry, Brian, you get to stay home. I don't know. To me, it just seems most simple to say you don't want general sales, right? So you're suggesting to people that you can sell something that you have made. And I guess I would limit it at that.
Except the example you brought up about the jewelry.
Yep.
People making jewelry, most of them are doing beads and they're selling beads. So.
Right. Yeah, so that would be, but to me, that would align, right, with what they're doing.
Well, but you're taking out the part about items customarily maintained in connection with. I don't think many people would start selling dogs with their dog houses.
Oh, no, that was crazy. Yeah, I mean,
That's a cat, that's a kennel, so.
yeah. Again, I guess if, somebody's doing something like beads, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't anticipate that you're going to get like caravans of vehicles that are going to be at that house every day.
Has this provision right here caused a problem? Because changing something makes it seem as if, yeah, there was a problem and we're fixing it. Whereas leaving it alone requires no thought.
Yeah, I guess. I just didn't know if it made a lot of sense or who or what was going to enforce that, but. Then let's see, moving along. So if you want to leave it, that's fine. I was just reporting the note that I had. I guess the next section, moving down, that I had a note on after traffic and parking, there was a line about employees that got eliminated. And I think what you want to say for as of right is that there are no employees, because then as you move down into the special permit section, it allows for employees based on the grant of a special permit. So I had written a note that I recommended that you just put no employees under the as of right section.
So really quickly, before we move on from that, are you suggesting that perhaps we just strike the second sentence versus striking the entire clause?
Yes, yep, that's fine. Yep. I actually had that same note.
Any comments on that one? And I can read it if people have put away their notes.
Yeah,
Helpful.
would you, Jed, please?
So it would say, it would be number 6, employee, and it would say only family residents may be regularly employed on the premises in connection with the home occupation. That would obviously say home-based business. The second sentence, which we would be deleting, would say the zoning board of appeals may grant a special permit to one person, not a family member, to be regularly employed on the premises of the home-based business. And in theory, that second sentence could be deleted because we then start talking about it in the next section where it's special permit.
If you're all set with that, moving down into the special permit section of the home-based business. And you're talking about the criteria that the zoning board of appeals will allow. And the first paragraph you have there is a home-based business which may have impacts to the neighborhood with noise, appearance, vibration, blah, blah, blah. I would recommend striking that because there's not a way that the zoning board is going to grant anybody a special permit for a home-based business that's going to have disruptive characteristics to the neighborhood, right?
I
And-
agree with Noreen there, because we have a provision in the bylaw before that that says there'll be no noise.
Correct. So I would not even offer that somebody can have the opportunity to come and plead because you'd be wasting everybody's time. The board's not going to grant somebody the right to be obnoxious, right? So I would leave that out.
Maureen, I'm sorry, I missed that one. Which item was this one?
So as you look under 249.5C, special permit,
Mhm.
and you have the word criteria, and that first sentence is fine. But then that next paragraph where it starts a home-based business which may have possible impacts, I would strike that whole section.
Just one difference I'm noting between those two sections though, at least, and again, we're kind of going through this rapid fire. Personally, I would recommend, but it's totally subject to the committee's preference, maybe pumping the brakes before we do red lines so that everybody can have a chance to just kind of think about things. One thing that I'm noticing that is a difference is, at least in that 240-9.5B 3, it mentions noise, vibrations, etc. But then in 9.5C, One, there's a reference to outward appearance that doesn't appear to be consistent with 9.5 P3. So just think, to whatever extent we're just wholeheartedly striking something.
Yeah,
maybe
the
just compare.
Ryan, the outward appearance got separated, so if you look on 249.5A requirements, the first item is outward appearance, and it just got separated out. So the language is essentially the same, but so the rationale that I had for removing it under special permit was because you're already telling everybody you can't do this, right? Like you can't have a visual outward appearance change. You can't make noise, fumes, blah, 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 right? So you've already told them that's a no, and the zoning board is not going to grant them relief to do that either. So I think it's still rational to say no. And if somebody absolutely wanted to come in and ask for something that was going to change an appearance or noise, vibration, whatever, they can technically apply for a variance.
So just for clarification purposes, I think that if the way I read it is in the 9.5B section, those are for the by right home-based businesses. So that is to say, there shouldn't be any, storage or outward appearance change or whatever if you're going to be a by right home-based business. However, if you're seeking a special permit, these are different rules that you might be subject to. But I hear, Noreen, what you might be saying is that, well, this rule may never actually be allowed because the intent of it is to limit its impact on the neighborhood.
Right, because you obviously want essentially a benign, whatever it is, to be in someone's home. You don't want to change a residential neighborhood to look like a business district or act like a business district or agricultural or anything else, right?
Question, are Airbnbs considered a home-based business?
That's probably the question of the year. I think I would defer on discussing those at this point in time, but something, yeah, that's a big can of worms. So,
But so far, they're not considered a home-based business?
Commercial company.
Well, most home-based businesses would be creating a service or selling a product.
It is a service.
Well, they're actually not selling a service that they're doing. They're actually using the property itself.
it's more
So
of
it's not,
it's a commercial activity, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's different than a home-based.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah, it is.
Is
Well,
there
what's the
not-
service?
So I don't mean to be rude, but I unfortunately do have a hard stop at 12:30 that I'm already kind of over right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and log off.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So why don't we do this in the interest of time? Noreen, if you could just send us your comments and we can try to incorporate them and then bring them back to the group for further consideration
Okay,
at the next meeting.
yep, perfect.
Jed, one quick comment, edit, based on Noreen's comment. If you're going to make 249.5B say as of right requirements, you should make for consistency's sake 9.5C say special permit requirements.
Yes, yep.
Smart. Okay, so that was fun. The next meeting, and don't forget, we're transitioning to the fourth Wednesday of every month. So this will be April 26th at 11 a.m. Mark your calendars. That's school vacation week, so children are allowed to attend the meeting if they're in your dwelling. it's not school vacation week. I am informed that
Yeah.
I'm once again not correct.
You're 1 week late.
Anyways, happy Wednesday, everybody. Tuesday, whatever.
I have
day
a
it is.
brief story about home-based service businesses or home-based businesses. Just after I became town council, I became aware that the Air Force had a contract with a gentleman who lived in Falmouth and who in his basement was making nose cones for intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Home-based bomb service.
Well, then,
So sometimes you never know what's out there.
Yeah. It's truly noxious.
All right.
I'm here on the 26th. I can't make that meeting.
does anyone else have a conflict with the 26th that we should be aware of? And
I have to go check my calendar. Run and see.
Actually, I cannot make that meeting either.
Okay, well, it's not gonna be then.
I mean, I'm game to put it into school vacation week, and then I can be right again.
Do you want to try for that Tuesday, or is that a bad day for you?
I am fine on the 26th.
I'm fine on the 25th,
25th.
25th.
Too
I-
fun.
Here.
Either day I'm fine, which Tuesday or Wednesday.
It's sounding like the 25th would be preferable.
Okay.
The planning
All
board
right.
meeting that night? On the 20th? No, that Matt, I just was throwing that out there just for planning board members.
Yeah, we'll have that meeting too.
Yeah.
So why don't we tentatively say the 25th? Bob, if you would just reach out to the other Bob,
Yep.
make sure that works for him, and we'll be in touch.
Right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.